The fluorescent lights of the roadside diner flickered against the darkness outside, casting long shadows across cracked vinyl booths that had seen better decades. Rain hammered against the windows with a violence that suggested the storm had personal grievances to settle. Inside, wiping down tables with movements born of muscle memory rather than thought, a woman in her late 20s moved through the empty space like a ghost haunting her own life. Her name was Maxie Morgan, and exhaustion lived in the slump of her shoulders, in the way her hand pressed against her lower back every few minutes, in the dark circles beneath eyes that had once sparkled with dreams of something more than this. The diner, Miller's 24-hour stop, sat on the outskirts of Riverside, a town too small for ambition and too tired for hope. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better, the kind of place Maxie had somehow never managed to leave. Outside, the storm was escalating from bad to catastrophic. Weather reports had been screaming warnings all afternoon, but Maxie had learned long ago that responsibilities didn't pause for inconvenient weather. Her daughter needed medicine, her landlord needed rent, and the universe had never shown much interest in making things easier just because life was already hard. The ancient heating system rattled and wheezed, fighting a losing battle against the cold seeping through every crack in the building's weathered walls. She glanced at the clock above the register, its hands moving with agonizing slowness toward midnight. Another 3 hours until her shift ended. Another 3 hours of pretending the weight of the world wasn't slowly crushing her into dust. Through the window, she could barely see the road anymore. Just sheets of rain illuminated by the diner's neon sign, the one that buzzed and flickered and spelled out half of the word open on good days. The bell above the door chimed, violent and sudden, as the door was shoved open against the wind. Maxie turned, her rehearsed customer service smile already in place, but the expression died on her lips as she took in the men filing through the entrance. 6 of them, soaked to the bone, moving with the kind of careful coordination that spoke of training or experience or something darker. They weren't the usual truckers or late-night travelers who stumbled into the diner seeking coffee and comfort. These men wore expensive suits now ruined by rain, their shoes polished despite the mud, their eyes sharp and assessing as they swept the empty diner with professional efficiency. The last man through the door was different from the others, taller, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier just from him being in it. He carried himself like someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, and when his gaze landed on Maxie, she felt pinned in place like a butterfly in a collector's case. "Welcome to Miller's," Maxie managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just grab any seat you like. I'll be right with you." The silver-haired man nodded once, a gesture that somehow felt like a royal acknowledgement, and the group moved to the largest booth near the back. Maxie noticed how they positioned themselves, how 2 of them kept their backs to walls, how their eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and angles and potential threats. She'd seen enough crime shows to recognize the behavior, enough news reports to understand what it might mean. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered menus, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Whatever these men were, whatever they'd done or might do, right now they were just customers in her diner during a storm. Nothing more complicated than that. She had to believe that, had to hold on to the simple transaction of service and payment, because the alternative was terror she couldn't afford to feel. "Coffee?" she asked as she approached their table, keeping her voice light and professional. "Coffee sounds perfect," the silver-haired man said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle, cultured in a way that didn't match the dangerous edge radiating from the group. "For all of us, and whatever food you have available. We're not particular. Kitchen's technically closed, but I can make sandwiches, heat up some soup. Maybe some pie if you're interested. Whatever you can manage would be appreciated." The man's eyes met hers directly, and Maxie saw something unexpected there. Weariness, maybe, or the shadow of something almost like humanity. We weren't planning to stop, but the roads are becoming impassable. The highway patrol has shut down the main routes. Maxie glanced toward the windows where the storm had intensified to the point where visibility was nearly zero. The radio in the kitchen had been broadcasting increasingly urgent warnings all evening, talking about flooding and accidents and recommending that everyone stay indoors. These men had clearly been caught unprepared, and despite her instincts screaming warnings, Maxie found herself feeling something dangerously close to sympathy. "I'll get that coffee started," she said. "Give me a few minutes on the food." In the kitchen, her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind raced. There was something wrong about these men, something that made her nerve endings sing with alarm, but there was also something desperate in their situation. They were stranded, same as anyone else would be in this weather, and Maxie had never been the kind of person who could turn away someone in need, even when common sense suggested she should. She loaded a tray with coffee cups, the pot, cream, and sugar, and carried it back to their table. As she poured, she studied them more carefully. Younger men flanked the silver-haired one, and they had the look of soldiers or bodyguards, watchful and tense. One had a fresh cut above his eyebrow, another kept flexing his hand like it hurt. They'd been in some kind of trouble recently. That much was clear. "Rough night?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. The silver-haired man's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. "You could say that. Sometimes business takes unexpected turns. I'm Julian, by the way. Julian Romano. And you are?" "Maxie." She hesitated, then added, "Maxie Morgan. I've been working here about 2 years now." "2 years in this place?" Julian glanced around the diner with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That takes dedication. Takes desperation, more like," Maxie replied before she could think better of it. Then she caught herself, remembering that honesty wasn't always the best policy with strangers. "Sorry. Long shift. I'll get your food started." "Maxie." Julian's voice stopped her before she could retreat. "Thank you. For not turning us away. Not everyone would have been so kind." There was something in his tone that made her pause, turn back. "You planning to cause me trouble?" "No," Julian said simply. "We're just trying to wait out the storm." Nothing more than that. Maxie studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception and finding only tired sincerity. "All right then. Sandwiches coming up." Back in the kitchen, she assembled food with efficient movements, her mind working through the strangeness of the situation. These men were clearly not ordinary travelers, clearly involved in something that existed outside the boundaries of normal life. But Julian's eyes had held no malice when he'd thanked her. Whatever danger they represented seemed directed outward, not at her. She loaded plates onto a tray and carried them out, distributing food around the table. The men ate with surprising restraint, no grabbing or rudeness, just quiet efficiency. They said please and thank you, and when one of them accidentally knocked over a water glass, he apologized profusely and helped her clean it up. They were, Maxie realized with growing confusion, impeccably polite for people who radiated violence like heat from a furnace. "This is excellent," Julian said after his first bite. "You made this?" "Just sandwiches," Maxie replied with a slight shrug. "Nothing fancy. But I try to do it right." "Doing things right matters," Julian observed. "My grandmother used to say that how a person does anything is how they do everything. Put care into a sandwich. Put care into life." "Your grandmother sounds wise." "She was." Julian's expression softened with memory. "She ran a small restaurant in the old neighborhood. Taught me that feeding people was about more than just food. It was about dignity, about making someone feel seen and valued. I've tried to remember that lesson." Maxie felt something shift in her perception of this man. He wasn't just a dangerous stranger anymore. He was someone's grandson, someone who'd been taught about care and dignity by a woman who'd understood the power of both. It didn't erase whatever he was or what he might have done, but it complicated the picture in ways that made him harder to dismiss. The storm outside reached a new level of fury, and suddenly the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie blue glow that made shadows dance across walls. The heating system's constant rattle went silent, and within minutes, the temperature began to drop. "Well," Maxie said into the darkness, "that's not ideal." Julian pulled out his phone, the screen providing a small circle of light. No signal. He looked at his men. "Anyone?" A chorus of negatives answered him. They were cut off, trapped in a bubble of emergency lighting and rapidly cooling air with no way to contact the outside world. Maxie felt her chest tighten with the beginning of panic. The backup generator was old and unreliable, the heating system depended on electricity, and if the power stayed out for long, this building would become dangerously cold. "How long do these outages usually last?" Julian asked, his voice calm and steady. "Depends. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes hours. Once it was 2 days." Maxie tried to keep her voice level. "There's some blankets in the back office and the gas stove still works, so we can at least make hot drinks. What do you need us to do?" The question surprised her. She'd expected these men to demand service, to treat her like hired help, who existed solely to meet their needs. Instead, Julian was asking how they could help, offering assistance like an equal partner in their shared predicament. "There's a storage room through that door," Maxie pointed. "Blankets on the top shelf. And there should be some camping lanterns we use when this happens. If a couple of you could grab those, the rest can help me move tables together near the kitchen. It'll be warmer there with the gas stove going." The men moved immediately, following her instructions without question or complaint. Within 20 minutes, they'd transformed the small space near the kitchen into something resembling a makeshift camp. Tables pushed together created a large central area, blankets were distributed, and the camping lanterns provided warm, steady light that pushed back the shadows. Maxie fired up the gas stove, more for heat than cooking, and the flame added both warmth and a sense of normalcy to the strange situation. "Efficient operation," Julian observed, settling into one of the chairs they'd arranged near the stove. "You've done this before." "Few times," Maxie confirmed. "This building is old and the electrical system is temperamental. You learn to prepare for the worst. Good philosophy for life in general." Julian accepted a blanket from one of his men and draped it over his shoulders. "I have to say, this isn't how I expected tonight to go." "What were you expecting?" Julian was quiet for a moment and Maxie wondered if she'd overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I was expecting to be in a warm bed in the city by now. Probably. Drinking expensive whiskey and pretending the evening's business hadn't left a bad taste in my mouth." "What kind of business?" Maxie asked, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, that's probably not something I should ask about." "Probably not," Julian agreed, but there was no anger in his tone. "Let's just say I'm in a complicated line of work that sometimes requires difficult decisions. Tonight involved several of those decisions, and I'm not entirely at peace with how things went." His honesty surprised her. Maxie had expected deflection or lies, not this strange vulnerability. She found herself sitting down across from him, drawn into conversation despite her better judgment. "Do you regret what you did?" Julian considered the question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret protecting what's mine. In my world, hesitation gets you killed and the people you care about hurt. So I do what I must, and I live with the weight of it." "That sounds lonely." "It is." Julian's eyes met hers, and Maxie saw genuine loneliness there, the kind that came from being perpetually separated from normal human connection by choices and circumstances. Most people don't understand the life I lead. They either fear me or want something from me. Real conversation, real connection, it's rare. Maxie found herself saying, "I don't fear you." Julian tilted his head slightly. "You should. I'm not a good man, Maxie. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details." "Maybe," Maxie said slowly, "but you also helped clear tables and distribute blankets without being asked. You said please and thank you. You're sitting here having an honest conversation instead of treating me like I'm invisible. That counts for something. Does it?" Julian's voice carried genuine curiosity. "In the grand calculation of a life, do small kindnesses balance out large sins?" "I don't know about balance," Maxie replied, "but I think how we treat people in small moments says something about who we really are, underneath everything else. Your grandmother taught you about dignity and care. That's still in you, even if you've had to bury it under other things." Julian was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the flickering light. "You're an interesting woman, Maxie Morgan. Most people don't speak to me the way you do." "Most people probably aren't too tired to be afraid," Maxie said with a slight smile. "I've been running on fumes for so long that my self-preservation instincts are basically non-existent at this point." "Why so tired? What's driving you to exhaustion?" The question opened something in Maxie, and before she could stop herself, words were spilling out. "My daughter. She's 7. She has a chronic illness that requires expensive medication and regular treatments. Her father left when she got diagnosed. Couldn't handle the reality of having a sick kid. My insurance is terrible, my pay is worse, and every month is a calculation of which bills I can partially pay while keeping enough for her medicine. I work double shifts when I can, pick up any extra hours available, and still I'm always behind, always scrambling, always terrified that one missed payment will send everything crashing down." She stopped abruptly, surprised by her own candor. "I don't know why I just told you all that. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear about my problems." "Don't apologize," Julian said quietly. I asked, "And for what it's worth, you're doing something far more difficult and honorable than anything I've ever done. Protecting your child, sacrificing everything to keep her healthy and safe, that's real courage. What I do, it's just survival dressed up in expensive suits." Maxie felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She couldn't remember the last time someone had acknowledged the weight she carried, had called her courage anything other than just what mothers do. She blinked hard, forcing the emotion back down. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "Do you have children?" "No," Julian replied, and something sad crossed his face. "I never found the right person to build that life with. My work makes relationships complicated. Most women either want the lifestyle and power that comes with being connected to me, or they want to fix me, to transform me into someone respectable and safe. Neither option appeals. What would appeal?" Julian smiled, but it was melancholy. Someone who saw me clearly, all of it, the good and the terrible, and chose to stay anyway. Not because they wanted to change me or use me, but because they found something worth loving underneath the monster I've become. But that's fantasy, Maxie. In reality, men like me don't get happy endings. The conversation drifted into silence, comfortable and contemplative. Around them, Julian's men had settled into their own quiet activities, some dozing, others playing cards with a deck someone had found in the storage room. The storm continued its assault on the building, but inside their small circle of warmth and light, there was an unexpected sense of peace. Hours passed in this strange, suspended reality. Maxie made more coffee, heated up soup, and found herself talking with Julian about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in a tight-knit neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, about his grandmother's restaurant and the lessons she'd taught. She told him about her daughter's love of drawing, about the small apartment they lived in with walls covered in colorful pictures, about dreams deferred but not abandoned. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken. The rain that had hammered the building all night softened to a steady patter, and through the windows, the first gray light of morning began to seep into the sky. The emergency lighting seemed more intrusive now, harsh against the natural dawn, and Maxie realized with surprise that she'd spent the entire night in conversation with a man who should have terrified her. Power should come. "Back soon," she said, checking the main breaker for what felt like the 100th time. Usually does once the storm passes. As if summoned by her words, the lights flickered and then steadied. The heating system coughed back to life, and the normal sounds of the diner's electrical systems hummed back into existence. The spell of the night was broken, reality reasserting itself with fluorescent brightness and mechanical efficiency. Julian stood, stretching muscles that had gone stiff from hours in the chair. His men stirred as well, gathering their things with the same quiet coordination they'd shown entering. The moment had passed, the strange intimacy of the night dissolving in the ordinary light of day. "What do I owe you?" Julian asked, reaching for his wallet. Maxie did quick mental math. For 6 people, the food, the coffee, call it $50. Julian pulled out $500 bills and placed them on the counter. "Keep the change. Consider it thanks for the conversation as much as the food." Maxie stared at the money. "I can't take this. It's too much." "You need medication for your daughter," Julian said simply. "Consider it payment for services rendered. You provided shelter during a storm, safety when we needed it, and conversation that reminded me there's still humanity in the world." "That's worth far more than $500. Maxie wanted to argue, but looking at those bills, thinking about the prescription that was coming due, about the breathing treatments that cost more each month, her pride buckled under the weight of practical necessity. "Thank you," she whispered. Julian nodded and turned toward the door, his men filing out ahead of him. But before he left, he paused, pulling a business card from his pocket. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, "anything at all, call this number. No strings attached, no expectations, just an offer of help if circumstances become desperate." Maxie took the card, feeling the expensive weight of the cardstock between her fingers. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because tonight you treated me like a person instead of a monster," Julian replied. "Because you showed kindness without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. Because your daughter deserves a mother who doesn't have to work herself to death to keep her alive. And because maybe, in some small way, helping you helps me believe I'm not completely beyond redemption." Before Maxie could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the gray morning with his men, leaving behind only the scent of expensive cologne and the weight of possibility in the form of a simple business card. Maxie stood in the empty diner, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave now that the adrenaline of the night had faded, and wondered if she'd hallucinated the entire encounter. The money on the counter proved it had been real. $500 in crisp bills that could keep her daughter's prescriptions filled, could buy groceries for the month, could give her a tiny margin of breathing room in the constant financial suffocation of her life. She picked up the bills with trembling hands and tucked them carefully into her pocket, then looked at the business card. No name, just a phone number embossed in simple black print. No indication of what kind of help might be offered if she called. No clues about who Julian Romano really was, beyond the obvious implications of dangerous men in expensive suits. Maxie should have thrown the card away, should have recognized the transaction for what it was, and moved on with her life. Instead, she slipped it into her wallet, tucked behind her daughter's picture, and told herself she was just being practical. She wouldn't call. Of course she wouldn't. But having the option, having one small escape route in case things got truly desperate, that felt like a lifeboat in an endless ocean. Just knowing it was there made breathing a little easier. 3 weeks later, Maxie was beginning to think the night had been a strange but ultimately inconsequential blip in her otherwise grinding routine. Life had returned to its normal rhythm of work and worry, of stretching every dollar and stealing every spare moment. The $500 had helped tremendously, but money had a way of disappearing when you were always behind, and already she could feel the familiar pressure building again. Her daughter had been doing well, which was both a blessing and a financial burden. Doing well meant more treatments, more medications, more trips to specialists who didn't accept insurance and demanded payment up front. Maxie had picked up extra shifts, was running on 4 hours of sleep a night, and could feel her body starting to rebel against the constant strain. She was wiping down tables after the lunch rush when the bell above the door chimed. Maxie glanced up automatically, her customer service smile ready, and felt her heart stutter in her chest. Julian Romano stood in the doorway, looking somehow even more imposing in broad daylight, wearing another expensive suit and carrying himself with that same quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside. "Maxie," he said, his voice as gentle as she remembered. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Around them, the handful of other customers had gone silent, sensing something significant in this interaction. Maxie was aware of eyes on them, of the sudden weight of attention, and she gestured toward a booth in the corner, away from curious ears. "What are you doing here?" she asked once they were seated, keeping her voice low. "I wanted to check on you," Julian replied simply, "to make sure you were all right, and to make an offer." "I'm fine. The 500 helped a lot. Thank you for that. I'm glad. But that's not the offer I'm talking about." Julian leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Maxie, I've been thinking about our conversation that night, about your situation, about your daughter, and I want to help more substantially. I don't understand. I own several properties in the city. One of them is a building with a restaurant on the ground floor and apartments above. The restaurant has been closed for 2 years, and the apartments are empty. I'd like to offer them to you." Maxie felt like the world had tilted sideways. Offer them? What does that mean? The apartment? Rent-free. The restaurant space? Also free? Or for minimal rent if you'd prefer to feel like it's a transaction. "I'll cover initial renovation costs, equipment, whatever you need to open your own place. You clearly have talent and a gift for hospitality. You should be using those gifts to build something for yourself, not wearing yourself out in someone else's establishment." Maxie stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "Why? Why would you do this?" Julian was quiet for a moment. "Because I can. And because you deserve better than this life that's slowly killing you. Because your daughter deserves a mother who isn't exhausted and stressed every moment. And because, selfishly, I enjoyed our conversation that night, more than I've enjoyed any interaction in years. I'd like to have more of those conversations, and I can't do that if you work yourself into an early grave." "This is insane," Maxie whispered. "You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're kind and brave and intelligent. I know you put your child's needs before your own. I know you treated me with dignity when you had every reason not to. That's more than enough basis for wanting to help you." Maxie felt tears threatening again. This was too much, too generous, too overwhelming. There had to be a catch, some hidden expectation that would turn this gift into a trap. People didn't just give away apartments and businesses to strangers, especially not people like Julian Romano. "What do you want from me?" she asked directly, needing to understand the real price of this offer. Julian met her eyes steadily. "Nothing. No strings, no expectations, no quid pro quo. This is a gift, Maxie, not a transaction. Though I'll admit I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope we might become friends. I enjoyed our conversation that night, enjoyed being treated like a person rather than a monster or a resource. If opening a restaurant gives you a better life and occasionally gives me someone to talk to honestly, then everyone wins. And if I say no, then I'll respect that decision and leave you alone. The offer stands, but it's entirely your choice. No pressure, no consequences either way. Maxie looked down at her hands, at the ring she still wore despite her ex-husband's abandonment, at the calluses from years of service work, at the trembling that came from exhaustion and emotion, and the sudden, overwhelming possibility of change. Every practical instinct screamed that this was too good to be true, that accepting would entangle her in a world she didn't understand and couldn't navigate. But another part of her, the part that was so tired of fighting and losing that wanted desperately to give her daughter a better life, that part whispered maybe. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course." Julian pulled out another card, this one with an address written on the back. "This is the property. Go look at it. See if it's something that could work for you. Take all the time you need. And Maxie, truly, there's no wrong answer here. I respect whatever you decide." He left as quietly as he'd arrived, and Maxie was left holding another small card that represented another impossible possibility. Around her, the diner continued its normal operation, but she felt like she'd stepped outside of time, outside of the normal flow of cause and effect. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Fairy godmothers didn't exist, and dangerous men in expensive suits didn't offer salvation without expecting something in return. But the card in her hand was real, and the address was real. And that night, when her shift ended, Maxie found herself driving to the location, her curiosity overriding her caution. The building was in a decent neighborhood, not wealthy but respectable, the kind of place where people put flowers in window boxes and swept their stoops. The restaurant space on the ground floor had large windows and good bones, and through the glass she could see an interior that would be beautiful with some care and attention. The apartments above would be bright and warm, far nicer than the cramped space she currently squeezed into with her daughter. There would be room for a proper bedroom, for a play area, for all the things she'd dreamed of providing but never could afford. Standing there looking up at those windows, Maxie felt something dangerous unfurl in her chest. Hope, that most treacherous of emotions. She called the number on the card that night after her daughter was asleep. Julian answered on the second ring. "I want to see inside," she said without preamble. "Tomorrow," Julian suggested. "I can meet you there at noon?" The next day, Maxie called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and met Julian at the building. He gave her a tour, pointing out features and possibilities, and with every room she saw, the vision became clearer. She could see her restaurant here, could imagine the menu, the atmosphere, the care she'd pour into every detail. She could see her daughter running through these rooms, happy and safe, could imagine a life where exhaustion wasn't her constant companion. "What's the catch?" she asked when the tour was complete. "Please, just tell me the truth. What do you really want from me?" Julian looked at her steadily. "Honestly, I want redemption. I want to believe that despite everything I've done, all the darkness I've been part of, I can still do something genuinely good. I want to help you because helping you helps me believe I'm more than the sum of my sins. That's the truth, Maxie. Selfish in its own way, but honest." Maxie studied his face, searching for deception and finding only weary sincerity. She thought about her daughter, about the life she could provide here, about the possibility of building something meaningful instead of just surviving. She thought about risk and reward, about trust and fear, about the difference between foolish hope and brave possibility. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll do it. But I need you to understand something. I'm not naive. I know who you are, what you probably do. If accepting this means I'm somehow part of that world, somehow complicit, I need to know now. You're not part of anything except your own life, Julian replied firmly. This building, this opportunity, it's completely separate from my business. You'll never be asked to participate in, witness, or enable anything connected to my other work. This is clean, Maxie, as clean as I can make anything. And if someday your other life comes looking for you here, then I'll handle it, and I'll make sure you and your daughter are protected. You have my word. Maxie knew she was probably being foolish, knew that accepting help from someone like Julian Romano was walking into complications she couldn't fully anticipate. But standing in that empty restaurant space, imagining it full of light and warmth and the satisfaction of work she chose, rather than work forced upon her, she found the courage to take the risk. The next 3 months passed in a blur of activity and transformation. Julian was true to his word, providing funding for renovations without hovering or demanding input. Maxie threw herself into creating her vision, choosing every detail with care, building something that reflected her values and dreams. Her daughter loved their new apartment, loved having space to play and create, loved the way her mother smiled more and cried less. The restaurant opened to modest but genuine success. Maxie cooked with the same care she'd shown in the diner, treated her customers with the same dignity, and slowly built a reputation for excellent food and warm hospitality. Julian came by occasionally, always polite, always respectful of boundaries, usually just sitting quietly with coffee and watching her work with something like satisfaction in his eyes. They fell into an easy friendship, strange as it was. Julian would stop by after difficult days, and they'd talk over late-night coffee about everything and nothing. Maxie learned more about the complexity of his world, about the impossible choices and moral compromises, about the loneliness of power without connection. He learned about her hopes and fears, about her daughter's progress, about the small triumphs and setbacks of building a business from nothing. It was during one of these late-night conversations, 6 months after the restaurant opened, that everything shifted. Julian had arrived looking more worn than usual, his shoulders carrying a weight that seemed especially heavy. Maxie poured coffee without asking and sat across from him, waiting. "I killed someone today," Julian said quietly. He'd been skimming from operations, putting people at risk. There was a trial, a judgment, an execution. I pulled the trigger myself because that's what leadership requires in my world. And now I'm sitting here with you, drinking coffee and pretending I'm someone who deserves this kind of normal moment. Maxie was quiet for a long time, processing this confession. She should have been horrified, should have thrown him out and called the police. But she'd known, on some level, what Julian was capable of. His honesty now, his willingness to show her the darkness instead of hiding it, that meant something. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," Julian replied. He earned his fate, and hesitation would have been worse. "But I regret what it costs me, what it makes me. I regret that I can never fully escape what I am." "You gave me this," Maxie gestured around the restaurant. "You gave my daughter a future. You've been nothing but kind and respectful, despite having every opportunity to demand something in return. Maybe you're more than what you do in your other life. Or maybe I'm exactly what I do. And this, us talking like I'm a normal person, maybe that's the fantasy." Maxie reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture surprising them both. "You're both," she said firmly. "You're the person who makes impossible choices in an impossible world. And you're the person who remembered his grandmother's lessons about dignity and care. Both are true, Julian. You contain multitudes. Julian stared at their joined hands, and Maxie saw something crack in his expression, some carefully maintained wall beginning to crumble. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "How do you see the monster and still find the man?" "Because the man is who you are when you have the choice," Maxie replied. "And you keep choosing to be kind to me and my daughter." "That's not nothing." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Julian gently pulled his hand back, rebuilding his walls with visible effort. "I should go," he said. "It's late and you have an early morning tomorrow." But he came back the next week, and the week after, and slowly their friendship deepened into something neither quite knew how to define. Maxie found herself looking forward to his visits, found comfort in his steady presence. Julian seemed lighter when he was with her, the weight he carried easing just slightly in her company. Maxie's daughter met him during one visit and immediately declared him her friend, showing him her drawings with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of childhood. Julian listened with genuine attention, asked thoughtful questions, and when the girl hugged him goodbye, Maxie saw tears glisten in his eyes before he blinked them away. "Your daughter is remarkable," he said after she'd bounded back upstairs. "She's everything," Maxie replied simply. "Everything good that I am or could be lives in her. She has an extraordinary mother." The compliment hung between them, and Maxie felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and warm. This was getting complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated, feelings developing that had no business existing between a single mother trying to build a respectable life and a man whose hands were stained with blood she couldn't see but knew was there. "Julian," she started, then stopped, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. "I know," Julian said quietly. "I feel it too, and I don't know what to do about it." "We can't," Maxie said. "My daughter, my life here, I can't bring that darkness into it. I would never ask you to." Julian's voice was firm. "Maxie, you and your daughter, you're the best things in my life. The thought of contaminating that, of bringing my world anywhere near yours, it terrifies me. Maybe we just stay as we are. Friends. Nothing more complicated." Maxie nodded, ignoring the ache in her chest that suggested she wanted more complication, not less. "You're right. Of course you're right." But despite their agreement, the feelings didn't disappear. They grew, quiet and insistent, in every conversation and shared coffee, in every moment when their eyes met and held just a second too long. Maxie found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering if he was safe, hoping he'd stop by. Julian's visits became more frequent, and he started bringing small gifts, a toy for her daughter, flowers for the restaurant, books he thought Maxie might enjoy. The neighborhood noticed, of course. People talked about the well-dressed man who visited the new restaurant owner late at night, about the obvious affection between them, about what it might mean. Maxie fielded questions with practiced deflection, but privately she wondered the same things. What were they to each other? What could they become if circumstances were different? The crisis came 8 months after the restaurant opened. Maxie was closing up late one evening when 3 men entered, their intentions clear in their aggressive postures and cold eyes. They weren't there for food. One grabbed her roughly, demanding to know where Julian was, what she knew about his operations, making threats about what would happen if she didn't cooperate. Maxie's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to stay calm, tried to remember the self-defense moves she'd learned years ago but never thought she'd need. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear flooding her system. "This is a restaurant. I serve food. That's all." "Don't play stupid," the largest man snarled, his grip tightening on her arm until she felt bone grinding against bone. "Everyone knows Julian Romano comes here. Everyone knows he's got a thing for you. You're leverage, sweetheart. And you're coming with us." Terror gave way to cold clarity. Maxie understood now the danger Julian had tried to shield her from, understood that proximity to him made her a target regardless of his intentions or her innocence. She opened her mouth to scream, but one of the men clamped a hand over it, and she was being dragged toward the back exit when the front door exploded inward with a violence that made everyone freeze. Julian stood in the doorway flanked by 4 of his men, and the expression on his face was nothing Maxie had ever seen before. This wasn't the gentleman who drank coffee and talked philosophy. This was the other Julian, the one who existed in a world of blood and power, and his rage was a palpable force that filled the room like poison gas. "Let her go," he said quietly, and somehow the softness of his voice was more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "Let her go now, and you might live through the next 5 minutes." The men holding Maxie hesitated, clearly calculating odds and finding them poor. But the largest one, either braver or stupider than his companions, tightened his grip and pulled a gun, pressing it to Maxie's temple. "Back off, Romano, or I redecorate your girlfriend's restaurant with her brain." Time seemed to slow down. Maxie felt the cold metal against her skin, felt her bladder threaten to release from pure fear, felt every detail of the moment burn into her memory with crystalline clarity. She saw Julian's face, saw calculation and fury, and something that looked like desperation, saw him weighing options and finding them all terrible. Then he raised his hand slowly, stepping forward with careful deliberation. "Take me instead," he said. "I'm the one you want. Let her go, take me, and you can negotiate whatever terms you want with my organization. She's worth nothing to you except as bait. I'm the prize." The man holding Maxie considered this, and for a terrible moment Maxie thought he might refuse, might pull the trigger just to prove he could. But greed won out over pride, and he shoved Maxie roughly away, turning his gun toward Julian instead. Maxie stumbled, catching herself against a table, and watched in horror as the men surrounded Julian, weapons trained on him from multiple angles. He met her eyes across the room, and his expression was gentle again, almost peaceful. "Go upstairs," he said quietly. "Take your daughter and lock the door. Don't come out until someone you trust comes to get you." "Julian," Maxie whispered, but he was already turning away, his attention on the men threatening him with death. Maxie ran. She hated herself for it, but she ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time and bursting into her apartment where her daughter was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the violence happening below. Maxie locked every lock, pushed furniture against the door, and pulled her daughter into her arms, whispering reassurances while her own body shook with fear and rage and helplessness. Below, she heard shouting, then gunfire, sharp cracks that made her daughter wake screaming. Maxie held her tight, covering her ears, praying to gods she didn't believe in that Julian would survive, that the violence would end, that somehow this nightmare would resolve without her daughter being orphaned and her own life being destroyed. The gunfire stopped. Silence fell, heavy and ominous. Maxie held her breath, straining to hear anything that might tell her what had happened. Then footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. She grabbed the kitchen knife she'd brought with her, positioned herself between the door and her daughter, and prepared to fight if necessary. "Maxie," Julian's voice came through the door, rough and strained. "It's over. You're safe." Maxie nearly collapsed with relief. She moved the furniture aside with shaking hands and threw open the door to find Julian standing there, blood spattered and exhausted, but alive. Behind him, his men were efficiently dealing with bodies, moving with practiced precision that suggested this wasn't their first cleanup operation. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, her hands moving over him automatically, checking for wounds. "Not my blood," Julian replied quietly, catching her hands and holding them still. "Maxie, I'm so sorry. I tried to keep this away from you, tried to protect you from exactly this kind of situation. I failed. And I'm sorry. What happens now? Maxie asked, very aware of her daughter watching from the bedroom doorway with wide, frightened eyes. Now I make sure this never happens again, Julian said firmly. I'm going to station guards here. People you'll never see, but who will always be watching. Anyone who even thinks about threatening you will disappear before they get within 100 yards. And I'm going to send a message to every organization in this city that you and your daughter are completely off limits. That touching you means war with me, personally. That's not a solution, Julian. That's just more violence. It's the only solution I have, he replied, and she heard the frustration and helplessness in his voice. Maxie, I can't give up my life. Can't walk away from what I am. But I also can't walk away from you. So this is what I can offer. Protection. Safety. A life where you never have to fear this happening again. At what cost? Maxie asked quietly, glancing at her daughter who was now crying silently in the doorway. At what cost to her? Growing up knowing her mother is protected by a man who kills people? What does that teach her about the world? Julian followed her gaze and saw the child's tear-stained face. Something broke in his expression, some final wall crumbling. You're right, he said softly. You deserve better than this. She deserves better. I should go. I'll make sure the guards are invisible. Make sure you're protected, but I'll stay away. It's the only way to keep you truly safe. He turned to leave, and Maxie felt something tear inside her chest. This man who'd given her everything, who'd asked for nothing, who'd just risked his life to save hers, was walking away because he believed it was what was best for her. And maybe he was right. Maybe the smart choice was to let him go, to take the protection he offered and build a life that didn't include the complications and dangers he represented. But Maxie had spent years making the smart choice, the practical choice, the choice that prioritized survival over happiness. She'd married a man she didn't love because he seemed stable, had endured his abandonment without complaint, had worked herself nearly to death for her daughter's sake. She'd been smart and practical and self-sacrificing, and it had given her a life that was safe but joyless. Looking at Julian's retreating back, at the exhaustion in every line of his body, Maxie made a different choice. Not the smart one, not the practical one, but the one that felt true. Wait, she called out. He stopped but didn't turn around. Maxie crossed to him, moving around to face him directly. My daughter is watching, so I'm going to say this quickly and simply. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you despite the darkness. Maybe even because of it. Because you carry that weight and still manage kindness. I love you because you see me, really see me, and still think I'm worth protecting. Maxie, Julian started, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not finished, Maxie interrupted. I know this is complicated. I know there are dangers and difficulties I can't even imagine, but I'm tired of making choices based on fear. I'm tired of playing it safe and ending up exhausted and alone. So here's what I'm proposing. You keep us safe the way you described. You stay in my life the way you have been. And we figure out the rest as we go, together. Because I'd rather face complicated with you than face simple alone. Julian stared at her, and Maxie saw a dozen emotions cross his face in rapid succession. Disbelief, hope, fear, longing, and finally something that looked like surrender. What about her? He gestured toward Maxie's daughter. How do we explain this to a child? We tell her the truth in words she can understand, Maxie replied. We tell her that you're someone who cares about us, who keeps us safe, who made mistakes in his past but is trying to be better. Children understand complexity better than we give them credit for. She's already asking about you, already considers you her friend. We build from there, carefully, honestly, and we figure it out together. I don't deserve this, Julian whispered. Don't deserve you or her, or this chance at something normal. Maybe not, Maxie agreed, but you're getting it anyway. That's how grace works, Julian. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to accept the gift when it's offered. Julian reached out slowly, giving Maxie every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle despite the violence those hands had done, tender despite the blood still drying on his cuffs. I love you, he said quietly. I've loved you since that first night in the diner when you treated me like a human being instead of a monster. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you see the world with hope, despite every reason not to. And I promise you, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of this gift you're giving me. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Maxie felt something settle into place in her chest. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a girl, wasn't the safe and simple romance of storybooks. This was messier, more complicated, more real. But it was hers, and that made it perfect. From the bedroom doorway, Maxie's daughter watched with wide eyes. Is he staying? She asked. Maxie looked at Julian, who nodded slowly. Yeah, sweetie, he's staying. Good, the girl said simply. I like him. He listens when I talk about my drawings. The crisis had passed, but the reality of their situation remained complex. Julian kept his word about protection, and Maxie never saw the guards but knew they were there. The restaurant continued to thrive, and Julian became a regular fixture in their lives, careful to keep his darker business completely separate from the world he shared with Maxie and her daughter. They built something strange and beautiful together. Julian taught Maxie's daughter to play chess, attended her school plays, showed up for the small moments that mattered. Maxie learned to read the tension in his shoulders when business had gone badly, learned when to ask questions and when to simply provide comfort without words. They created a life that existed in the margins between his world and hers, not fully part of either, but containing elements of both. The neighborhood eventually accepted their relationship, though rumors and speculation never fully died. Maxie weathered the whispers with the same grace she brought to everything else, holding her head high and refusing to be ashamed of loving a complicated man. Her daughter grew up knowing that the world wasn't simple, that people contained multitudes, that love meant accepting someone fully even when parts of them were difficult to understand. A year after that night, Julian proposed. Not with fanfare or public declaration, but quietly over late-night coffee in the empty restaurant, with Maxie's daughter already asleep upstairs. He offered a ring and a promise, not of perfection, but of presence, not of a life free from complications, but of facing those complications together. Maxie said yes without hesitation. They married in a small ceremony with only close friends present, and if some of those friends were dangerous men with blood on their hands while others were teachers and neighbors and regular customers, well, that seemed appropriate for a union that existed between two worlds. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were nights when Julian came home with darkness in his eyes that took hours to fade. There were moments when Maxie questioned her choices, when fear crept in and whispered that she'd put her daughter at risk for selfish reasons. But there were also mornings of shared coffee and quiet conversation, afternoons watching her daughter play while Julian smiled like he'd found something precious he'd never expected to have. Evenings of building a life that felt authentic and earned rather than prescribed and safe. Maxie's restaurant became a landmark in the neighborhood, known for excellent food and genuine warmth. Julian's reputation in his other world grew more complex, feared for his ruthlessness, but also respected for his word and his unexpected capacity for mercy. They existed in two spheres simultaneously, keeping them separate but allowing each to inform the other. Maxie's daughter grew into a teenager who understood nuance and complexity, who could look at her stepfather and see both the man who'd helped her with homework and the one who inhabited a world she'd never fully understand. She learned that love wasn't about ignoring difficult truths, but about choosing connection despite them, and that lesson served her better than any pretense of simplicity ever could have. On their fifth anniversary, sitting in the same booth where they'd first really talked during that storm years ago, Julian looked at Maxie with something like wonder. "How did you know?" he asked. "That night when I offered you everything. How did you know I wasn't just another man trying to buy something he wanted?" Maxie considered the question seriously. "I didn't," she admitted. "Not completely, but I saw your grandmother's lessons in how you acted. I saw genuine loneliness in your eyes, and I was desperate enough, and brave enough, or maybe foolish enough to take the risk. Sometimes the best things in life require a leap of faith into uncertainty. Do you regret it? Ever?" "Not for a single moment," Maxie replied honestly. "This life, it's not what I imagined, but it's real. It's mine. It's ours. And that makes it more valuable than any safe, simple alternative." Julian took her hand across the table, the gesture now familiar and comfortable after years of repetition. "I was a dead man walking before I met you," he said quietly, "going through motions, executing plans, but not really living. You gave me life, Maxie. You and your daughter. You gave me reasons to be better than I was, to want more than I had. Everything good in me now exists because you believed it was there first." Maxie squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of their shared history in that simple touch. "We saved each other," she said. "That's what love does. It sees what could be and helps it become real." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in a storm and chosen to build something lasting from that chance encounter. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, danger and beauty coexisting in the same space. Inside, in this small pocket of warmth and coffee and connection, two people who should never have worked together had created something that transcended the logic of their separate worlds. Maxie thought about that first night, about the choice to show kindness to dangerous strangers, about how a single act of hospitality had cascaded into a completely different life. She thought about the scared, exhausted woman she'd been, working herself to death with no hope of anything better. And she thought about who she was now, still working hard but for herself, still tired sometimes but fulfilled, still facing challenges but never alone. The storm that had brought Julian into her life had seemed like just another hardship at the time, another obstacle in an endless series. But it had been a gift disguised as disaster, an opportunity hidden in crisis. Maxie had learned that sometimes the things that seemed most dangerous were actually paths to salvation, that sometimes the smart choice was to be brave instead of safe, that sometimes love required accepting complications instead of demanding simplicity. Years later, when Maxie's daughter was grown and starting her own family, she would ask her mother for advice about relationships. Maxie would think back to that night, to Julian standing in the doorway of a diner with rain streaming off expensive clothes, to the choice she'd made to see a person instead of a problem. And she would tell her daughter something her grandmother had once said, something that had proven true in ways she never expected. The biggest mistake people make is assuming they can predict how love stories end. Sometimes the best ones are the ones you never see coming, the ones that start in storms and build into something that weathers every season. Sometimes the person who seems all wrong is actually exactly right, if you're brave enough to look past the surface to the truth underneath. And sometimes, if you're very, very lucky, an act of kindness on the worst night of the year can transform into a lifetime of choosing each other, complications and all. That's not a fairy tale. That's something better. That's real. Maxie looked at Julian, still sitting across from her after all these years, still finding comfort in her company, still carrying his darkness while reaching toward her light. She thought about the life they'd built, messy and complicated and occasionally terrifying, but authentic in ways that safe, simple choices never were. Outside the restaurant, the city hummed with life. Inside, two people who'd found each other in a storm held hands across a table and chose each other again, the way they did every day, the way they would keep doing for whatever time they were given. Not perfect, not simple, but theirs. And that made it beautiful.